The marble staircase gleamed white and gold beneath the afternoon light, 23 steps spiraling upward like a monument to power. At the top, Luca Valenti stood frozen, his dark suit pristine, his olive skin suddenly drained of color. Behind him, a child screamed. A gunshot cracked through the silence of the estate like thunder splitting open the sky. The masked intruder descended from the landing above, pistol raised, finger tightening on the trigger. Luca's body was still processing the first shot when the second rang out. His men downstairs would hear nothing. Soundproofing. Tactical. Professional. But Aria Morgan, the woman who had worked in his house for exactly 11 days, did not think about any of that. She moved. Her entire body, 118 pounds of muscle and bone and desperation, threw itself against Luca's torso. Both hands shoved him sideways with force that shocked them both. The third gunshot tore through the space where his chest had been a millisecond before. It missed him. It didn't miss her. The impact spun Aria backward. Her feet lost the edge. Her body found gravity. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Her shoulder cracked against marble. Her hip. Her ribs. The back of her skull met each step like a bell being struck, vision fragmenting into white light and darkness. 23 steps, and she remembered every single one. The sound of her own bones. The taste of blood filling her mouth. The complete absence of anything solid to grab. She landed at the bottom in a twisted heap, one arm bent at an angle that made her stomach heave. Blood pooled beneath the left side of her head, dark and spreading across the white marble like spilled wine. Footsteps thundered down from above. Gunshots. 3 rapid cracks. The masked intruder crumpled on the landing, bleeding, finished. Emma screamed and screamed and screamed. Luca Valenti, the most ruthless crime boss in the Nevada desert, the man who had crawled out of his own childhood violence swearing no child under his protection would ever suffer as he had, stood at the top of the stairs looking down at the woman whose name he had known for less than 2 weeks, whose hands he had never held, whose face was now turned sideways against the cold stone. Her eyes fluttered closed. One eye was already swelling. Blood ran from her hairline down her temple. The arm bent beneath her body was definitely broken. Her breathing came shallow and irregular, as if each breath was a negotiation with her own body. Vinny, his lieutenant for 20 years, emerged from the kitchen hallway, pistol still raised, eyes still scanning for threats. When he saw Aria's body at the bottom of the staircase, he stopped moving. In 20 years of serving Luca Valenti, he had never seen that look cross the boss's face. Something raw. Something unguarded. Something that looked almost like prayer. "Call the ambulance," Luca said. His voice was steady. His hands were not. "The police?" "Not the police. St. Mary's. Private wing. Tell Dr. Castellano we are coming with a patient who cannot be documented. Tell him there is no price for his silence. Tell him there is only loss if he speaks." Vinny nodded and stepped away, phone already moving to his ear. His hands moved with the practiced efficiency of a man who had made 100 such calls, who understood the shadow networks that kept the boss's world operating beneath the world everyone else inhabited. But something had shifted on that staircase. Something cold and dangerous stirred in the chest of Luca Valenti, something that had nothing to do with the dead man bleeding on his landing, something that had everything to do with a woman who had been in his house for 11 days and had just thrown her body between him and a bullet. This would be the last moment either of them would remember as the world before. But what Luca Valenti did not understand, as he knelt beside Aria's broken body and lifted her into his arms with a tenderness that shocked even himself, was that this moment would require him to descend into a darkness he had spent 30 years carefully constructing, to become the man he had always been beneath the suits and the manners and the illusion of control. And what Aria Morgan did not know, as blood ran down her face and her vision swam in and out of focus, was that one hand reached out at exactly the right moment would change an entire life. The siren would arrive in 7 minutes. The questions would arrive after that. Now, let us go back to the beginning. Let us return to 3 weeks earlier, to a bitter October night when Aria Morgan had nothing but $5 in her pocket and a debt collector's letter that said final notice in red letters that felt like a scream. The 2003 Honda Civic was parked behind the Circle K on South Las Vegas Boulevard, tucked between the dumpster and a wall of crumbling stucco where the night manager did not look too closely. Aria sat in the driver's seat, her keys hanging from the ignition, her hands wrapped around a lukewarm cup of coffee she had bought 3 hours ago. The coffee cost $2. She had $5 left. Minus the coffee meant $3 remained to bridge the gap until she found work, until someone hired her, until the world remembered that she existed. Her face in the rearview mirror was the face of someone the world had forgotten. Dark eyes hollowed by sleeplessness. Cheekbones too sharp. Hair pulled back so tightly it made her scalp ache, an old trick to make the style last longer, to stretch the days between haircuts from once every 6 weeks to once every 9 or 10. She was 27 years old and looked like someone who had lived 40. The gym at the 24-hour fitness opened at 5 in the morning. Aria would go there, use the bathroom to wash her face with the thin towels and industrial soap, change into her restaurant uniform, and then walk for blocks to the Sunrise Diner where Douglas Hale owned the business and owned the rules and owned the futures of the 15 people who worked his shifts. She did not have a home. She did not have a family. She did not have anything except the $5, the car, the clothes on her back, and a debt collector's letter that had arrived at the restaurant's address because the collection agency did not know where else to find her. They were looking for $22,000. The letter said she had 14 days to respond before they would begin the process of legal action. Legal action meant a civil suit she could not afford to defend. It meant wage garnishment from every job she would ever have. It meant that every dollar she earned from this moment forward would belong to someone else. The debt was medical. Her brother had been sick 12 years ago when she was still young enough to believe the hospital would help, would care, would not charge $100,000 for a final diagnosis that changed nothing except the amount of money owed. Her parents had put it on her credit, the naive belief that she would be able to pay because that is what you did, you paid your debts, you honored your obligations, you did not disappear. She had tried to pay. She had worked double shifts and triple shifts and she had given every penny to the hospital and they had still pursued her, still contacted her, still sent letters marked final notice and urgent action required. The $5 was all she had left after buying the coffee and after paying the rent on the storage unit that held the last boxes of her life, things from before, things from when she had a home address, things that did not fit inside a 2003 Honda Civic. She pulled the envelope from the glove compartment. The red letter seemed to pulse in the dim light filtering through the windshield. Final notice. The problem was not the debt. The problem was that she was invisible to the world except when she owed money. Then, suddenly, she was seen. Pursued. Marked. At 4:51 in the morning, Aria Morgan turned the key in the ignition. The engine turned over with a sound like a cough, like something that needed medical help, like this car was also dying and taking her with it. She pulled out of the parking lot and drove toward the gym, toward the bathroom sink, toward the day that would unfold exactly like yesterday and the day before that. She did not know that inside a penthouse 18 blocks away, a man was about to learn that his 6-year-old daughter was collapsing, that she could not breathe, that the color was draining from her lips. She did not know that a desperate father would soon be offering anything, everything, to anyone who could bring his child back. She did not know that in 9 hours, her life would split into before and after. The gym was already filling with people. Women in expensive workout clothes that cost more than her monthly food budget. Men in tailored athletic wear. Everyone moving through the space with the casual assumption that they would always have access to things like gymnasiums and mornings off to use them. Aria changed in the bathroom stall, folding her sleeping clothes into a ball and stuffing them into the bottom of her backpack. Her work uniform was black pants and a white button-down shirt. The seams were coming loose on the left shoulder. The Sunrise Diner smelled like grease and burnt coffee and possibility that never arrived. Douglas Hale owned the diner and 3 underground poker rooms and a network of businesses that moved money in directions that required not asking questions. He was 53 years old and had the face of someone who had learned early that cruelty was more useful than kindness. His business partner was Evelyn Blackwell, a woman who owned the Obsidian Hotel 3 blocks away and who carried her wealth like a weapon, like evidence of her superiority, like proof that some people were simply better at living than others. Douglas Hale stood in the kitchen when Aria arrived, smoking a cigarette over the stove, which was illegal in Las Vegas, which meant he was already signaling his relationship to law. He did not acknowledge her arrival. At 6:15 in the morning, the first customers came in. A man in construction clothes who ordered eggs over easy and black coffee. 2 women who split a waffle and did not tip. A couple who asked for separate checks then argued about who had eaten more. Aria moved through the diner with the efficiency of someone who had learned that moving fast was sometimes the only way to become invisible again. Faster than noticed. Faster than patronized. Faster than the point where her presence annoyed people enough to complain. At 9:33 in the morning, her phone rang in her locker in the back. She checked it during her 15-minute break. The hospital. Emma Valenti. 6 years old. Severe asthma attack. Father requesting immediate consultation about treatment options. The message had been left 4 hours ago. Aria did not know who Emma Valenti was. She also did not know that the hospital was calling because the father had gotten the number wrong, had frantically called every restaurant in the city looking for information about a woman who had somehow witnessed something, who had been in the right place at exactly the right time, who had proven through that singular act that she possessed something rare. The call had been a mistake. The universe had made a mistake that would change everything. Douglas Hale appeared in the kitchen doorway at 11:33 in the morning, and his face held the expression of a man about to cause damage. He approached Aria where she was wiping down the counter, and he lowered his voice so that only she could hear him. "You've been stealing tips," he said. It was not a question. It was not true. "No," Aria said. "I would never. I've been watching you. I've seen you put money in your pocket. Money that belongs to this business. Money that you are stealing." Her hand stopped moving. She understood in that moment something about how the world functioned for people like her. The truth did not matter. His word against hers was not a contest. He held the job. She needed the job. Therefore, what he said was real, and her denial was the voice of a thief pretending innocence. "I'm sorry," she said. Not because she had done anything wrong, but because the only survival strategy she had learned was appeasement. "You owe me $340 in missing revenue. You can work it off, or you can stop coming in. Your choice." He walked away before she could respond. The irony was so complete it felt almost intentional. Someone who had stolen nothing now owed money for theft she had not committed. Someone who was already chasing a $22,000 debt now carried an additional burden of $340 that existed only in Douglas Hale's calculations and his need to feel powerful over someone who could not fight back. At 3:14 in the afternoon, as Aria was serving soup to an elderly woman who reminded her of her grandmother, a black SUV pulled up to the front of the diner. Then another. Then a third. The doors opened with synchronized precision, and men in dark suits emerged, men who carried themselves with the weight of serious purpose, men whose presence made the diner go quiet in a way that suggested everyone understood that power had just walked in. The man who led them was tall, 6'2", with dark hair silvered at the temples and a scar running from his eye to his cheekbone like a map of violence. His suit was tailored so perfectly that it seemed to define the concept of tailoring. He wore a gold watch on his left wrist and a single silver ring on his left hand. His eye scanned the diner and found her. Aria felt something shift in her chest. The way he looked at her was not the way customers looked at waitresses. It was the way someone looked at something they had been searching for and finally located. The man approached her while his men stood by the door, creating a perimeter of space, making the diner smaller just through their presence. "Are you Aria Morgan?" he asked. His voice was deep and solid like an oath, like something that could not be broken once spoken. "Yes," she said. The word came out barely audible. "My name is Luca Valenti. I have a proposition for you, and I suspect you will find that saying no is not advisable. But I will give you the courtesy of a choice. He gestured toward the SUV outside. "We can discuss this here, where people are listening, where your employer might take offense, where your reputation," he paused as if he understood there was no reputation to defend, "where your situation becomes more fragile than it already is. Or you can come with me, and we can talk privately about a position in my household that pays $30,000 per month." Aria's hands were shaking. She did not move. "My daughter collapsed this morning. She stopped breathing. Someone performed CPR on her in a parking garage. Someone kept her alive until the ambulance arrived. We have been unable to identify this person. But we have been searching, and our search led us here." Aria understood then that the hospital had called, that someone had pieced together the details, that she had been found. "I did what anyone would do," she said. "No," Luca Valenti replied. "Most people would have walked past. Most people would have called it someone else's problem. You are not most people." He extended his hand toward her, palm open, a gesture of offering rather than demand. "Come work for my household. Take care of Emma. Help her breathe through the nights when her lungs close up. Be present when she wakes from nightmares. And in return, you will never be hungry again. You will never sleep in your car again. You will never wonder if $5 is enough to survive the week." The world seemed to stop. The diner froze. Douglas Hale appeared in the kitchen doorway, his face draining of color as he understood that something beyond his authority was occurring. Aria reached out and took his hand. Behind her, plates clattered to the floor. She did not turn around to see them fall. 3 weeks before Luca Valenti's world stopped turning, autumn cold bit through the empty parking garage like a blade wrapped in ice. The concrete was gray. The light from the overhead fixtures was yellow and dying. Aria Morgan walked between the rows of vehicles with her backpack slung across one shoulder, her breath visible in small clouds that disappeared before she could count to 3. She had washed her face 20 minutes ago in the gas station bathroom. Cold water from a sink that dripped continuously, a paper towel dispenser that never worked, a mirror that showed her a woman she barely recognized anymore. Her hair was pulled back tight. Her eyes were the color of rain on asphalt, a gray-blue that seemed to have forgotten how to reflect light. She was 27 years old but looked like someone who had lived 40. The $5 in her jacket pocket felt like both everything and nothing. She walked toward the Silver Moon Diner because Douglas Hale had promised her evening shifts. Not because she believed him. She had learned a long time ago not to believe men like Douglas Hale. But because $5 needed to become $15, and 15 needed to become 30, and 30 was the difference between eating and not eating for another week. The math never changed. The desperation never changed. Only the location changed. The parking garage was almost empty. A few sedans. A black SUV with tinted windows that seemed to swallow the light around it. The echo of her footsteps followed her like a ghost that refused to leave. Then she saw the child. The little girl was collapsed on the concrete between 2 parked vehicles, her small body absolutely still. She was maybe 6 years old, wearing a pink jacket with a name tag pinned to the zipper, Emma. Her lips were turning blue. Her skin had gone the color of old paper. Aria did not think. She did not calculate. She did not consider whether this was her responsibility or her problem. She simply dropped to her knees on the cold concrete and tilted the child's head back, checking the airway, feeling for breath that was not coming. The girl's body convulsed once. Twice. Her small chest seized with the violence of it. Aria placed the heel of one hand on Emma's breastbone, positioned her other hand on top, and began to push down with everything she had. The compressions were deep and hard and desperate. She counted aloud, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Her voice echoed off the garage walls. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Her hands ached immediately. Sweat dripped into her eyes despite the October cold biting at her skin. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. She did not know who this child was. She did not know that 30 feet away, inside the elevator, a man with shoulders as wide as a doorframe was descending from a business meeting on the 42nd floor. She did not know that the child's previous nanny had been texting a boyfriend instead of watching her charge. She did not know any of it. She only knew that a child was dying on cold concrete and no one else was coming. Breathe. Compress. Breathe. Compress. The compressions felt useless. The child was not waking. The blue deepened on her lips. Aria's ribs screamed as she leaned her entire body weight into each thrust, trying to shock a heart back into rhythm, trying to push life back into lungs that had forgotten how to work. Then Emma gasped. It was a small sound. Barely a gasp at all. But it was there. A breath that came from somewhere deep inside her, a reflex that meant her body was still fighting. Aria rocked back on her heels, trembling. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely make them into fists. Emma's eyes were still closed, but she was breathing, shallow, struggling, but breathing. The sound of sirens wailed across the city, growing louder, growing closer. That was when the elevator doors opened. Luca Valenti stepped out first. He was 6'1", with shoulders that filled the space, wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Aria's car. His dark hair was swept back from his face. A scar ran from his left eye to his cheekbone, thin and precise, like a blade had once tried to erase him and failed. His eyes were the color of a storm that had not yet broken, and in that moment they saw his daughter on the concrete and something inside them went absolutely still. He did not run. He did not scream. He simply dropped to his knees beside Emma, and his men, Vinny and Sal, who had followed him out of the elevator, froze in the moment of watching their boss, the man who never showed fear, gathering his child into his arms like she might shatter. Aria pushed back, getting to her feet. Her legs were weak. The sirens were very close now. She wiped her hands on her jeans, where they left wet marks, and stepped away from the tableau of a powerful man holding his child and breathing her name like a prayer. Emma. Emma, stay with me. Aria did not give her name to anyone. She did not stay to be thanked. She did not ask for anything, not money, not recognition, not even the knowledge that the child would be okay. She simply walked toward the exit of the parking garage, her backpack still on her shoulder, her $5 still in her pocket, and left the man kneeling on cold concrete with his daughter in his arms. The ambulance screamed past her as she reached the street. She walked to the Silver Moon Diner because her shift was at 6 o'clock and it was now 5:45 and Douglas Hale did not tolerate lateness. The diner was a thin strip of chrome and red vinyl on a corner that had seen better decades. Inside, the smell of grease hung in the air like a permanent resident. The black and white checkered floor was scuffed from 10,000 footsteps. 3 men in a booth near the window looked up as she entered, their eyes flat and measuring. They were not the kind of men who came to eat food. Douglas Hale appeared from the kitchen. He was in his early 50s, with a gut that hung over his belt and a way of standing that suggested he believed the world owed him an apology. His shirt was stained with something that might have been coffee or might have been blood. He smiled when he saw Aria, and his smile was like a door closing. "You're here," he said. "That's good. That's good. Table 6 needs water. Table 8 is waiting for their check. And don't forget, any tips you make tonight, you put them on the counter when you leave. House policy. I take a cut for scheduling." This was not house policy. This was theft. But Aria nodded and tied an apron around her waist and began moving through the diner with the muscle memory of someone who had done this 1,000 times in 1,000 different cities. Pouring water. Delivering plates. Smiling at men who treated her like furniture. Collecting checks that would be paid in dollar bills that she would have to split with Douglas Hale because he had decided that was the arrangement. Her hands were still shaking from the compressions on Emma's chest. She did not know that Vinny was already on his phone in that parking garage, already texting Luca, "The girl is stable. Paramedics are taking her to St. Mary's. The woman who found her, she performed CPR. She saved your daughter's life." She did not know that Luca, holding Emma's small hand in the ambulance as it screamed toward the hospital, was asking Vinny to find out everything. The woman's name. Where she lived. Where she worked. who she was. She did not know that within 2 hours, Luca would have access to hospital security footage that showed every second of her compressions, every moment of her refusing to give up on a child she had never met. She did not know that in the apartment above her boss's office, on a computer made of materials she could not name, the search results were already loading. She only knew that her shift was 7 hours long and that by the end of it, she would have earned maybe $45, and that Douglas Hale would take 15, and that 30 would buy her 2 days of food and half a tank of gas. She did not know that her entire life was about to change. But what was certain, what was absolutely inevitable, was that Luca Valenti did not forget his debts. He did not forget the people who saved what he loved. And he was already on his way to find her. The penthouse study fell silent except for the sound of ice cubes settling in Luca's glass. Outside, Las Vegas sprawled beneath them like a circuit board of neon and ambition, each light representing someone's desperation or someone's power. Luca sat in a leather chair that cost more than Aria's entire year of wages, and he watched her as if she were a puzzle he could solve by simply observing long enough. "Tell me about the debt," he said. Not a question. A command wrapped in courtesy. Aria's fingers twisted together. The fabric of her borrowed sweater, something from Luca's housekeeper that actually fit her properly, felt foreign against her skin. Everything in this house felt borrowed. Temporary. Like she might wake up tomorrow back in the Honda with $5 and this would all vanish like a fever dream. "My mother," Aria began, her voice barely above a whisper. "She had cancer. Stage 4 when they found it. The hospital said they could try aggressive treatment, but she stopped. Swallowed. There was no but. There was only cost. $53,000 for 6 months of chemotherapy that bought her 4 more weeks of life." Luca did not move. His scar, the one that ran from his temple to his jaw like a blade's memory, seemed to deepen in the lamplight. "53,000, he asked. 47, Aria corrected, her voice hollow. "The rest was buried in funeral costs, the house mortgage I couldn't pay, medical transport, drugs that insurance refused to cover. When I add it all together, when I count every bill and every notice, it comes to $203,000. She pulled the crumpled envelope from her backpack, the one she always carried, the one that felt like a weight attached to her ankle. "This one is from 3 months ago. Final notice. They will take the house next month if I don't pay." "You don't own a house anymore," Luca said quietly. "No," Aria whispered. "I own a debt. The house belongs to the bank." Vinny stood near the study door, his jaw clenched so tight a muscle jumped beneath his skin. In 15 years of working for Luca Valenti, Vinny had watched his boss order men broken, watched him negotiate with federal prosecutors, watched him move through the criminal underworld like a general surveying a battlefield. But he had never seen Luca's hands tremble. They trembled now, just slightly, as Luca reached forward and took the debt letter from Aria's fingers. The paper was soft from being folded and refolded 1,000 times. Creased at the edges like a prayer card carried in someone's pocket. "How many jobs?" Luca asked. 3, Aria said. "When I could find them." The diner during the day, the underground poker rooms at night as a cocktail server, cleaning office buildings in the early morning hours before the sun came up. 14-hour days for 8 months. And Douglas Hale took 30% of everything I earned from the diner. "He stole from you," Luca said. "He said I owed it for the privilege of working there." Aria's laugh was bitter, the sound of someone who had stopped believing the world made sense. "When I asked to work at a different restaurant, Evelyn Blackwell made sure no hiring manager would touch me. She called every establishment in the city. Told them I was a liar, a thief, a woman who made up assault allegations. She made sure that Douglas Hale was the only work I could get." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the ice in Luca's glass seemed to stop moving. "Assault allegations," Luca repeated. "He tried," Aria said flatly. "In the storage room. I got away. I reported it. Evelyn Blackwell arrived at the police station within 2 hours. She told them I had seduced him, that I was making it up because I was jealous of his attention to other waitresses. She had security footage from the diner showing me flirting with him. She edited the videos, cut out the parts where he cornered me, where his hands, Aria's voice broke. The charges were dropped. And then I was unemployable. Vinny turned away and walked to the window. The city lights blurred through his vision. Luca set the debt letter on the desk between them. He did not touch it again. He simply stared at it as if it were a threat written in blood. "When did this happen?" he asked. 3 weeks before I found Emma," Aria said. "I had $5 left. I was sleeping in my car. I had applied for jobs in 12 different cities, but all my references were poisoned. Every single one. I thought about leaving Las Vegas entirely. Driving east until the money ran out. Dying in a parking lot somewhere in Kansas or Oklahoma, and no one would ever know what happened to me." She paused. Then Emma collapsed. "You saved her anyway," Luca said. "I didn't know she was yours," Aria replied. "I didn't know anything except that a child was dying and I could do something about it. So I did." Luca stood abruptly. He walked to the window and stood beside Vinny, his silhouette cutting a shape against the glittering backdrop of Las Vegas. The two men stood in profile, neither speaking, and in that silence Vinny understood something profound. The ledger had just shifted. Aria Morgan was no longer simply the woman who had saved Emma's life. She was a victim, and Luca Valenti had just learned the names and faces of the people responsible for her destruction. And Luca Valenti did not forgive. He did not forget. He simply waited for the right moment to balance the scales. "You should rest," Luca said without turning from the window. "Emma has school in the morning. She will want you to walk her there." Aria stood on shaking legs. As she reached the study door, Luca spoke again. "The debt letter," he said. "Leave it with me." She set it on the desk beside his glass. The moment Aria closed the door behind her, Luca turned to Vinny. His voice, when he spoke, was so quiet it barely registered as sound. "I want everything," Luca said. "Every transaction Douglas Hale made. Every penny Evelyn Blackwell received from him. Every lie she spread. Every contact she made. I want names. I want dates. I want proof." "Boss," Vinny said carefully, "we don't move on someone like Evelyn Blackwell without understanding the consequences. She has federal contacts. She has lawyers on speed dial. If we touch her—" "I'm not going to touch her," Luca interrupted. "I'm going to destroy her. But I'm going to do it legally. I'm going to do it in a way that leaves no fingerprints. She believes she operates with impunity because she has money and connections. What she doesn't understand is that those same connections create paperwork. Trails. Records." He looked at Vinny with eyes that had become something ancient and merciless. "Find them all." Vinny nodded once and left the study. Alone, Luca picked up the debt letter. $203,000. Medical bills stamped with hospital letterhead. Final notices printed on official paper. Each one was a small violence against a woman who had done nothing except refuse to be destroyed by circumstances beyond her control. He thought of Emma in the ambulance, her small hand ice-cold in his grip. He thought of the moment Aria had knelt beside her in that parking garage and begun compressions, her hand steady despite her own desperation. He thought of her choosing a stranger's child over her own survival, because that was who she was. The decision had already been made. Not in the moment she agreed to work for him. Not in the moment Vinny brought her to this house. The decision was being made now, in this quiet study, with a debt letter sitting on mahogany that had been sanded and sealed by artisans Aria would never be able to afford. Sometimes one hand reached out at the right moment can change an entire life. But sometimes, a decision made in darkness could change everything else as well. The next morning, Aria walked Emma to the private school 3 blocks from the house. Emma held her hand and chatted about her spelling test, about a boy named Marcus who had pulled her hair, about the macaroni and cheese she hoped would be served for lunch. The October sun was warm on their skin, and for the first time in 2 years, Aria felt something that might have been peace. What she did not know was that 12 blocks away, in an office on the 42nd floor of the Monarch Hotel, Evelyn Blackwell was reading an email on her private phone. The email contained footage from the parking garage where Aria had performed CPR on Emma. The footage showed everything. The timestamp on the video was already being logged, already becoming evidence. And the person who had sent it was someone Evelyn Blackwell had believed was her ally. The sound of Aria's laughter as Emma made a joke, something about a dancing penguin, echoed through the morning air while, miles away, the machinery of her vindication was already turning. The October wind carried the sound of gravel crunching under tires as 12 black SUVs pulled up to the curb outside the Silver Moon Diner at 4:53 in the morning. Darkness still owned the streets. The neon sign above the restaurant flickered against the pre-dawn grey, casting everything below in sickly blue light. Federal agents in tactical gear stepped out in perfect synchronization, their boots hitting the pavement like a drumbeat that meant the end of something. 1 week had passed since Aria walked into Luca Valenti's life. 1 week since she chose to stay. Inside the diner, Douglas Hale was counting the register, stacking bills into neat piles, his fingers moving with the precision of a man who loved money more than breath. He did not hear the agents until they were already through the door. The sound of boots on tile. The sound of weapons being shouldered. The sound of his own voice screaming denial into a space that had become a prison. Douglas Hale. Agent Chen's voice was flat, administrative, without mercy. She was a woman in her late 40s, with steel-grey eyes and a scar running along her left temple like a permanent reminder that justice was not clean. She held a warrant that had been months in the making. You are under arrest for wire fraud, racketeering, human trafficking, and conspiracy to commit wage theft. Hale's face went the color of old bone. His hands moved to his chest like he was trying to hold something vital inside. "This is a mistake," he said, and his voice cracked on the second word. I would never?" "You did," Chen interrupted. She nodded to the agents behind her. They moved forward like machinery, efficient and cold. The handcuffs went on his wrists. They were stainless steel, and the clicking sound they made was final in a way that words could never be. Hale's knees buckled. One of the agents caught his arm, holding him upright as they led him toward the door. His mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air. "I'll tell you everything," he gasped. "Evelyn made me. She ordered me. She has connections. You don't understand what she's capable of." 40 years, Chen said quietly, reading from a document as they walked. "Federal prison. No parole. You had your chance to do the right thing, Mr. Hale. You chose this instead." They put him in a vehicle. The door slammed shut with a sound like a coffin lid closing. The diner was empty behind him, the register still open, the bills still stacked in neat piles. No one would count them now. No one would ever count them again. 3 blocks away, at the Monarch Hotel on the 42nd floor, Evelyn Blackwell was still sleeping. Her bedroom was all dark wood and white silk, the kind of space that cost more than Aria Morgan made in a year. The woman herself lay in bed wearing a nightgown that had been sewn by hand in Milan, her silver hair arranged on the pillow as though she was a sculpture, preserved and perfect. The sound of the battering ram on her door shattered that perfection. Evelyn jolted awake, her hand reaching for the phone on her nightstand. Before she could touch it, agents were already in her bedroom, flashlights cutting through the darkness like blades. The first thing she saw was Agent Chen's face, and in that moment, Evelyn understood that everything was over. "Do you have any idea who I am?" Evelyn's voice carried the weight of her own mythology. She had built her reputation on the belief that she was untouchable, that money and connections could erase consequences. She had believed it so deeply that she had become careless. "I have lawyers. I have judges who—" "You have nothing," Chen interrupted. She held up a warrant, and her voice did not rise, did not need to. "Flat. Certain. Final. We have 5 years of financial records. Testimony from 43 victims. Recorded phone calls of you ordering Douglas Hale to intimidate workers, to threaten their families, to destroy their documents. You're done, Ms. Blackwell. The color drained from Evelyn's face. She reached for the phone anyway, muscle memory, the habit of power. An agent moved it away from her reach. We're seizing your laptop, Chen continued. Your files. Your phone. Everything in this penthouse is evidence now. Evelyn stood, her nightgown falling around her like a shroud. She tried to maintain her composure, tried to arrange her face into something that resembled authority. But her hands were trembling. Her voice, when she spoke, came out as barely a whisper. You don't understand. I have? Yes, we do understand, Chen said. We understand completely. The cuffs went on differently than they had for Hale. Evelyn did not struggle. She did not beg. She simply became smaller, as though the act of being restrained physically was less devastating than being restrained by the truth. Agents led her through her own penthouse, cataloguing everything, photographing everything. The morning light was starting to creep across the city, and she was led from her apartment in handcuffs, still wearing her Italian silk nightgown, as hotel guests began arriving for breakfast. People stopped. People stared. People took photographs that would be on the news within the hour. 43 victims testify against hotel mogul. Blackwell empire crumbles under federal investigation. 5 years of exploitation uncovered in massive FBI raid. The news helicopters had been dispatched before dawn. Someone had tipped them off. Someone had wanted the world to see this. Luca was watching the coverage from his study when Aria found him. The television was on mute, the closed captions running across the bottom of the screen in white text against the blue glow. On screen, Evelyn Blackwell was being led into a federal building, her lawyer walking beside her, both of them looking like people who had just learned that their entire world was ending. You did this, Aria said. It was not a question. Luca did not look away from the screen. He was sitting in a leather chair that cost more than her mother's entire apartment, and he looked exactly as he always did, controlled, still, utterly at peace with his own violence. No, he said quietly. They did this to themselves. I just made sure the world saw it. Aria moved to the window. The sun was rising over the desert, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. It was beautiful. It was the kind of sunrise that felt like a promise. But her chest was tight with something that felt like dread, not relief. What happens now? She asked. Luca's phone buzzed. Then it buzzed again. Then it did not stop buzzing. Messages. Phone calls. The machinery of his world responding to the sudden absence of two obstacles. He looked down at the screen, and his expression shifted into something harder, something that made the temperature in the room drop. Now, he said slowly, we learn whether Blackwell kept her mouth shut or whether she decided to take us with her. The words hung in the air between them like a threat. Aria thought of the debt collector's letter, of the $200,000 she owed, of the ways that the world had taught her to run. But she also thought of Emma's small hand in hers. She thought of Luca's fierce promise, you are not nobody. She turned back to him. What do you need me to do? Luca stood. He moved toward her with a deliberate grace that made every movement seem intentional, purposeful. He reached out and tilted her chin up, his fingers gentle against her skin. His eyes were dark, and they were looking at her like she was the most dangerous person he had ever met. Stay, he said. No matter what comes next, stay. But what neither of them knew was that Evelyn Blackwell, sitting in an interrogation room downtown, was deciding whether she would cooperate with federal investigators. She was deciding whether she would trade what she knew about Luca Valenti's operations in exchange for a reduced sentence. She was deciding whether the woman who had taken her power would become an instrument of her revenge. The FBI agent across from her slid a folder across the metal table. Inside were photographs. Dates. Ledgers. Evidence. Tell us about Mr. Valenti, the agent said, and we can talk about your sentence. Evelyn looked at the photographs. She thought about Aria Morgan, about the moment she realized that power could be taken away. She thought about the choice she was being offered. She smiled. "I'll tell you everything," she said. The marble stairs stretched downward like a throat-swallowing light. Aria lay at the bottom, her body twisted at angles that made no anatomical sense, blood pooling dark and thick beneath her head like spilled wine. Her left arm hung useless, the bone shattered in at least 3 places. Her ribs screamed with every shallow breath. Above her, the echo of gunshots still hung in the air, and Emma's screams from the second floor cut through the darkness like a blade wrapped in ice. Luca Valenti stood at the top of the staircase, alive only because Aria Morgan had thrown herself against him with the force of everything she had never been given in her entire life: protection, safety, priority. The gunman lay 5 steps up, 3 bullets in his chest, his blood mixing with hers on the pale stone. Vinny was already on the phone. Sal was already moving toward the prone form with practiced efficiency. But Luca did not move. He stood frozen, watching the woman at the bottom of the stairs, understanding with the clarity of a man whose world had just fractured that he was looking at the moment everything changed. Then he moved. His descent was controlled, deliberate, each step measured even as his mind screamed. He dropped to his knees beside her, his expensive suit, $3,000, tailored in Milan, soaking up her blood without protest. His hands, which had ordered men's deaths with a single gesture, trembled as they hovered over her body, afraid to touch her, afraid to move her, afraid that any motion would snap what little remained of her intact. "Stay with me," he commanded, his voice breaking in a way it had not broken since he was a boy of 7 watching his mother's body being carried out of their apartment. "Aria, stay with me." Her eyes fluttered. She was conscious. The damage was catastrophic, but she was still fighting. Her lips moved, forming words that cost everything to speak. "Emma," she whispered. "Emma, safe." Luca pressed his forehead to hers, and his answer came out broken. "She's safe. You saved us. You saved both of us." Her eyes closed. The sirens arrived within 4 minutes, fast enough that someone had called before the bodies hit the ground. Fast enough that the universe, for once, did not punish Aria Morgan for being brave. The paramedics moved with practiced speed, cutting away her clothes, stabilizing her spine, calling out numbers to each other in the efficient language of trauma. They worked around Luca, who refused to release her hand until they physically had to peel his fingers away to load her into the ambulance. The ride to Mercy General took 8 minutes. Luca sat beside her, his hand wrapped around hers, watching her chest rise and fall, afraid that if he stopped watching the motion might stop of its own accord. She was pale. She was so pale that she looked translucent, like someone already halfway between living and whatever came after. The paramedic kept talking to her, keeping her conscious, asking her name, asking her date of birth, asking her where the pain was located. "Everywhere," Aria whispered once. "It hurts everywhere." The emergency room doors exploded open. 20 minutes of organized chaos. X-rays. A CT scan. A neurosurgeon called in from home. The diagnosis came like pronouncements in a foreign language: skull fracture, epidural hematoma, 3 broken ribs with possible pneumothorax, compound fracture of the left radius and ulna, internal bleeding requiring immediate surgical intervention. 6 hours of surgery. Luca did not leave the waiting room. He sat in a plastic chair that cost less than his watch, his suit still stained with her blood, his hands folded in his lap. Vinny and Sal sat across from him, saying nothing. In 15 years of working for Luca Valenti, they had never seen him like this, helpless, terrified, human in a way that made him somehow more dangerous, not less. This was a man whose power had just been proven useless. This was a man who could order empires built or destroyed but could not save the one person who mattered. The waiting room clock ticked through 6 hours and 14 minutes. 274 minutes. 16,440 seconds. Luca counted every single one. When the surgeon finally emerged, she was holding a clipboard and wearing the careful expression of someone delivering news that could go either way. She was a woman in her 60s, with grey hair pulled back severely and eyes that had seen too much. "Miss Morgan is stable," she said. "We controlled the internal bleeding. The arm fracture required 2 surgeries. She's going to have limited mobility in that hand, but with physical therapy, functionality should return significantly. The skull fracture was not as severe as the initial imaging suggested. No permanent neurological damage that we can identify at this time. She's going to make it." Luca's shoulders shook. Not with relief. With something deeper, something that might have been gratitude or grief, or the recognition that his entire understanding of his own invulnerability had just been shattered by a woman who weighed 120 pounds. 3 days later, when Aria woke in the ICU, Luca was asleep in the chair beside her bed. His hand was wrapped around hers. His face was unshaven, his suit replaced with casual clothes that made him look younger and more vulnerable. She lay there and watched him sleep, understanding that she was looking at a man who had not left her side since the paramedics took her. A man who had ordered the best surgeons, the best medications, the best everything that money could procure. A man who had held her hand while she was unconscious, speaking to her in Italian, a language she did not understand but could hear the grief in any way. The painkillers in her system made everything soft and distant. But one thought cut through clearly: she was alive. Against all probability, against all the laws of physics and consequence, she was alive. Luca woke when she moved. His eyes opened immediately, as if he had not actually been sleeping at all, just waiting for the moment she would come back to consciousness. He looked at her for a long moment without speaking. "Hi," Aria whispered. "Hi," he said back. 3 months passed like pages turning slowly in a heavy book. Douglas Hale and Evelyn Blackwell both received 40-year sentences with no possibility of parole. The sentencing was televised. The courtroom was packed with victims, 43 men and women who had been exploited, robbed, and threatened into silence. When Aria took the stand, her left arm still in a cast, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands, she described everything: the wages stolen, the threats made, the night she spent sleeping in her car in a Las Vegas parking garage with $5 in her pocket and no idea how she would eat the next day. Luca sat in the back row of the courtroom, watching. When Aria spoke, his entire body went still. She did not look at him. She did not need to. She was testifying not for him but for every person who had been told they were nobody by people who believed that belief would stick forever. The judge called Hale's actions systematic predation. The judge called Blackwell's participation calculated cruelty. The sentences were mandatory minimums, but they felt like justice anyway, the only kind justice ever really is. Recovery was slow. Physical therapy 3 times a week. The nightmares fading gradually, like a stain washing out of fabric. Aria remained in Luca's house, not as an employee anymore, not even as a guest, but as something neither of them had yet named. Emma called her Aria, not Nanny, and on most nights fell asleep holding her hand. The child did not ask why there had been blood on the marble stairs. She only knew that Aria had come back, and that was enough. One evening in late November, Luca and Aria sat on the terrace overlooking the city. The October cold had passed, replaced by the unexpected warmth of early winter. The lights of Las Vegas glittered below them like stars that had fallen to earth and decided to stay. "You saved my life," Luca said quietly. "Twice. Once when you saved Emma. Once when you pushed me on those stairs." Aria shook her head, her right hand steady as she lifted a glass of wine. The left arm was still weak, still healing. "You saved mine first. You gave me a life when I had nothing." Luca turned to her fully. His expression was open in a way it never was with anyone else. The scars on his face seemed softer in the city light. "We saved each other, then. On the worst nights of our lives." "I think we did," Aria said. They sat in silence, the city lights glittering below, 2 people bound by shared darkness and the impossible hope that came after. Aria Morgan walked into Luca Valenti's world with $5 in her pocket and a backpack on her shoulders. She had nothing. She was no one. But she acted when everyone else froze. That single moment, that one hand reached out in a parking garage to save a dying child, changed everything. Douglas Hale and Evelyn Blackwell are in federal prison for 40 years. The victims they exploited are finally free. Aria has a home, a family, and a man who looks at her like she hung the stars. And Luca Valenti, the most dangerous man in Las Vegas, learned that the bravest person he ever met was a homeless woman who refused to let a child die. Because sometimes, one hand reached out at the right moment can change an entire life. If this story moved you, drop a like right now. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe because tomorrow we are bringing you another story of courage, love, and justice. And comment below, have you ever acted when everyone else froze? Your story matters. We will see you in the next one. No matter how hard life gets, remember that after the rain, the sky clears. Thank you for staying with us until the very end. Goodbye, and we will see you again in the next video.